They say silence speaks volumes. But in my case, it screamed. 5 years of birthdays, Christmases, New Year's, and quiet, aching Sundays. 5 years without a single phone call, a visit, or even a "How are you, Mom?" message. And then, like clockwork, the moment rumors began that I was giving away everything, they came smiling. My children, the ones I carried, loved, fed, clothed, and defended through thick and thin. Suddenly, I became important. Not for who I was, but for what I had. It broke me, but it also woke me up. Let me take you back to where it all began. I wasn't always rich. In fact, for most of my life, I struggled. I was a single mother to 3 children, Daniel, Ella, and Sean. My husband walked out when Sean was just a baby, leaving behind a note that simply said he wasn't cut out for family life. No goodbye, no money, no forwarding address, just silence. So I did what any mother would. I survived. I worked 3 jobs, sometimes 4. I cleaned houses, washed dishes in diners, took night shifts as a receptionist, anything to keep food on the table and the electricity running. My body ached more than it didn't, but I never let my kids see me break. I gave them everything I could, not just food and clothes, but my time, my heart, my youth. I gave up dates, vacations, sleep, and dreams, all for them. They were my world, and for a while, they appreciated it. They were good kids, sweet, loving, helpful. Daniel was always the quiet thinker. Ella, my firecracker, could make a statue laugh. And Sean, the baby, was glued to my side like my little shadow. We had very little, but we had each other. Until we didn't. Things started to shift when they became teenagers. Slowly, love turned to convenience. Phone calls became one-word answers. Conversations ended with doors slamming. I blamed hormones, growing pains, the stress of school. But deep down, I felt it. They were slipping away. By the time they moved out for college, I was nearly invisible. At first, I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up, they get busy, they become independent. But when the months stretched into years without a visit, and then the years into silence, I had to face the truth. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I remember one winter, I must have been 63, when I caught pneumonia. I ended up in the hospital for 3 days. Not one of them knew, not because I didn't try. I called, texted, even left voicemails, but my messages were met with silence. Or worse, "Sorry, been swamped. Hope you're better." I didn't even get a card. Still, I never stopped loving them. Even when I cried myself to sleep, even when birthdays passed and I sat alone with a slice of cake I didn't finish, I told myself, they're just busy. They'll come around. Then came the lottery. It was a silly thing, really. I was picking up milk from the corner store, and the cashier said, "You've got a lucky face. Want a ticket?" I laughed and said, "Why not? $38 million. I didn't believe it at first. I checked the numbers 3 times. I thought it was a prank. When the reality sank in, I sat on the floor and cried. Not out of joy, but out of fear. What would this money change? Turns out, everything. At first, I didn't tell anyone. I lived like I always did. Same little apartment, same routines. I quietly met with a lawyer, hired a financial advisor, and started setting up foundations and charities in secret. I knew I didn't want this money to change me. But eventually, word got out. I don't know how. Maybe the store clerk. Maybe someone saw me with the lawyer. But the minute the story hit the local paper, local woman wins $38 million, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Guess who were the first to call? Daniel, Ella, Sean. After 5 years of nothing. "Mom, I've been meaning to call. So crazy with work, you know." "Hey, Mama, I was just thinking about you the other day. Mom, I miss you. I really do." The words were honeyed, sweet, polished, but they didn't taste right. Not after all that silence, not after 5 years of absence. Still, I wanted to believe them. I invited them over. The first time in 5 years, my house was full of voices, laughter, clinking glasses, the scent of Ella's perfume, Sean's loud jokes, Daniel's quiet presence in the corner. It almost felt like home again. Almost. But then I heard the whispering, saw the glances. They thought I didn't notice the way their eyes scanned the house. How they asked about my will, how they complimented the furniture, asked about my investments. They weren't here for me. They were here for what they thought I was giving away. And that shattered something inside me. Let me stop here for now, because the next part, that's when everything changes. When I decide that if I'm going to give anything away, it's going to be on my terms. Not as a mother desperate for love, but as a woman finally choosing herself. The house was quiet again the next morning. The chairs sat askew in the dining room. Half-filled glasses still clung to the scent of wine, and laughter echoes lingered in the air like a performance that ended too abruptly. I stood there, staring at the remains of what should have been a beautiful night. But I knew better. Their laughter had been too loud, their hugs too forced, their eyes too calculating. They didn't miss me. They missed the fortune they thought was now theirs. I kept playing the moments back in my mind. Ella's exaggerated gasp when she saw the necklace I wore. "Wow, Mom, is that new? Diamonds? You should let me borrow it sometime." Daniel's sudden interest in my plans for the future and whether I had made arrangements for who gets what. Sean's offhanded joke, "If you ever want to give away everything, make sure your favorite son gets the house." Yeah, it was all surface-level charm, hiding a much deeper truth. They didn't come back to rebuild what was broken. They came with open hands and empty hearts. A week passed, then another, and the visits kept coming. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. My phone buzzed with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Distant cousins, old co-workers, neighbors. Everyone had a memory to share. A "just thinking of you" text, or a curious question about what I planned to do with my blessings. And my children, oh, they became devoted overnight. Sean brought groceries, Ella offered to take me to the spa, and Daniel even helped me clean out the garage. It was like I was living inside a movie about a loving family. But the script was off, the acting too rehearsed. They thought they were fooling me, but they were only confirming what I feared all along. One night, after another carefully orchestrated surprise dinner visit, I sat alone on the porch. The night air was still. The stars blinked overhead, silent spectators to the unraveling story of a woman learning her worth the hard way. I reached into the side drawer of the patio table and pulled out the journal I hadn't touched in years. Inside were pages filled with prayers, pain, and poems I wrote during the darkest nights of loneliness. Scribbles of a mother who never stopped hoping, who still believed her children would come back for her, not her possessions. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote just one line. If love returns only when wealth appears, it was never love to begin with. That was the night I made my decision. I started slowly, quietly, carefully. I contacted my lawyer and updated my will. I met with my financial advisor and rerouted most of my wealth to the people and causes who had actually been there for me. My lifelong friend, Marion, who lent me rent money without blinking. The local women's shelter, where I used to volunteer. the librarian who let me take extra books when I couldn't afford late fees, my kind neighbor Grace, who checked on me every winter. I created scholarships for single mothers and a fund for underpaid nurses at the hospital, where I was once admitted with pneumonia and treated with more dignity than my own children had shown me in years. And as for my kids, they would get something too, but not what they expected. The test came soon enough. I decided to host a family dinner, a real one, no pretense, just us. I told them I had a special announcement to make. Of course, they came dressed in their finest clothes, with gleaming smiles and empty stomachs. They brought wine, flowers, and their best behavior. I welcomed them with warmth, not because I was pretending, but because I had already let go of the hope that they'd ever be who they once were. We sat around the table. I cooked their favorite dishes. We laughed, reminisced. I let them believe, for a moment, that everything was back to normal. Then I stood up, cleared my throat, and said, I know there have been years of distance between us. I know I haven't been the easiest mother to reach sometimes, but I want to believe people can change. So I've made a decision. I've decided to give everything away. You could have heard a pin drop. Daniel's fork froze midair. Ella's eyes widened. Sean leaned forward slightly. I smiled. All of it. My savings, my house, my investments, everything. I've donated most of it to causes and people I believe in, people who've shown me love, even when I had nothing. Their faces were a canvas of disbelief, fear, and something else, anger. Daniel finally spoke. Wait, you gave it away without talking to us? Ella blinked rapidly. You're giving our inheritance to strangers? Sean let out a nervous laugh. Mom, this is a joke, right? You're playing with us? I looked at each of them. Number, this is not a joke. This is me realizing that love, real love, is not for sale, and it's definitely not earned through guilt visits and rehearsed affection. Ella stood up. You can't do this. We're your children. I nodded. And I'll always love you, but I won't let that love blind me anymore. They left in silence. Not a hug, not a thank you, not a goodbye. And for the first time in years, I wasn't heartbroken. I was free. The silence after they left was louder than their voices had ever been. The door closed, and with it, years of illusions slammed shut. I stood in the hallway, watching the flickering shadows from the porch light stretch across the floor, like echoes of all the times I'd waited, for calls that never came, visits that never happened, apologies that were never offered. But strangely, I didn't cry. I brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea, walked to the window, and watched the night take over the sky like a gentle tide rolling in. There was pain, yes, but it wasn't the sharp, shattering kind. It was the quiet ache of healing, like a wound finally breathing after years wrapped in silence. I finally understood that peace sometimes feels like loss in the beginning, but it's not loss. It's space. Space for better things to find you. The next morning, I woke up lighter. No texts from them. No calls. I didn't expect any. What I didn't expect, though, was a letter, a real one, handwritten, in a purple envelope with looping cursive letters. It was from Grace, my neighbor across the street. She'd heard from the local shelter that someone had anonymously donated thousands in her late daughter's name. Somehow, she knew it was me. Her letter was filled with tears, made of ink and gratitude, etched into every word. You remembered her, when even I sometimes feel like the world has forgotten. I held the letter close, my eyes stinging. That's when I realized this was the feeling I had been chasing. Not admiration, not validation, but connection. True, human connection. I leaned into it. In the weeks that followed, I found myself blooming in ways I didn't expect. I joined a community art class, even though I hadn't painted since high school. I started volunteering again, this time reading stories to children at the local library. I invited Marion over for tea every Sunday, and we talked like we were in our 20s again, giggling, gossiping, swapping stories. I even took a trip to the seaside town I'd always dreamed of visiting. I stood barefoot on the beach, the salty wind in my hair, and watched the sun dip beneath the waves, with no one to rush back to, no obligation to carry. I was 66 years old, and for the first time in decades, I was living, not surviving, not waiting, living. Then, out of nowhere, came the call. It was from Daniel. His voice was tight, laced with something he tried to disguise as casual concern. "Hey, Mom. I heard from Uncle Tim you were going around giving everything away. Thought I'd check in." I smiled to myself. "That's thoughtful of you, Daniel." A pause. "Is it true? You really gave away the house?" I didn't answer the question directly. Instead, I asked, "How are your kids?" "I haven't seen them since they were toddlers." He cleared his throat. "They're good. Busy." I said. "Life gets that way, doesn't it?" Another pause. "So, what happens now? I mean, with you. Do you need help with anything?" And there it was, the guilt-threaded fishing line, cast into the waters of a relationship he'd only now realized was worth more than what I could hand down. But I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. "Daniel," I said gently, "I'm doing really well. I've got everything I need, and I'm surrounded by people who care. I hope someday we can really reconnect, not because of money, but because of something real." He didn't know how to respond, and that was okay. I received similar calls from Sean and Ella in the following weeks, each one with a different tone, one accusatory, one weepy, one trying to play the hero. But I kept the same boundary each time. I wasn't cruel. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't bend either. I loved them, but I finally loved myself more. Months passed. The air turned crisp. Leaves curled into gold and fell from trees like old memories finding their resting place. One afternoon, I was sipping tea in the backyard, wrapped in a blanket and listening to birds chatter, when I noticed something new growing by the fence, a small patch of wildflowers. I hadn't planted them. Maybe the wind had carried the seeds here. It made me smile. Sometimes, beautiful things grow where you least expect them, without permission, without planning, just like healing, just like hope. Winter came softly that year. Snow fell in hushes, blanketing everything in a kind of stillness that felt more like peace than pause. My little home, no longer grand, but cozy and warm, was filled with the scent of cinnamon, baked apples, and old records humming from a second-hand turntable I'd bought on a whim. One morning, as frost laced the windows, I received an invitation, not the kind you expect at 66. It was from a local women's shelter. They were honoring their donors at a holiday luncheon and asked if I'd say a few words. I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my thing, but something in me whispered, "Go." So I did. The room was modest, the crowd intimate. Women from every walk of life gathered around simple tables, with paper snowflakes dangling above. I stood at the front, heart thudding, hands trembling slightly. And then I spoke. I told them about silence, about years spent giving from an empty cup, hoping it'd earn me love. I told them about the day I realized that love given with conditions is not love at all, but a transaction. I spoke about how healing isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it's a warm mug between your hands, or a letter from someone you never expected. Sometimes it's walking away from a place you thought was your forever and finding home in your own company instead. When I finished, there was a stillness in the room that felt sacred. Then, slow and steady, applause. Not thunderous, not wild, just sincere. Afterward, a young woman approached me, maybe in her late 20s. She said, "I hope I grow into your kind of strength." I reached for her hand. "It doesn't happen all at once," I whispered. "But one day, you stop apologizing for breathing and start realizing you were never the problem. You were just too whole for people who were used to pieces." That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill, not in mourning, but in gratitude for everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. A few weeks later, just before New Year's, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I saw her, Ella, standing there, bundled in a scarf, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a photo album I hadn't seen in years. She didn't say much, just, "Can I come in?" I didn't rush to hug her. I didn't melt into forgiveness. I simply stepped aside. She sat on the couch and placed the album on her lap. We flipped through pages slowly. Birthdays, beach trips, messy kitchen photos, Halloween costumes half finished. Her voice cracked when she said, "I don't remember half of these." "I do," I said. "I remember everything." Tears fell from her eyes then, real ones. Not the kind cried for show or guilt, but the kind born from the ache of realization. She looked at me, trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was selfish. We all were." I didn't rush to reply. I let the silence speak for a moment. Then I nodded. "Thank you for saying that." She stayed for tea. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about inheritance. We just talked. I didn't know if this was the start of something new or just a flicker of closure, but I welcomed it without expectation. As the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, I stood outside with Marion and a few friends from the shelter. We watched fireworks light up the sky. I thought of everything I'd walked through. The years of invisibility, the sting of betrayal, the loneliness that once felt like a permanent companion. But standing there, cheeks kissed by cold wind, laughter ringing in my ears, and hands clasped with people who saw me, not what I could give, I felt something shift. Not everything that breaks stays broken. Sometimes the fracture lets the light in. I didn't end up giving away everything. I kept what mattered. A photo of my children when they were small. A painting I did of that seaside town. A letter from Grace. A wildflower pressed into a journal. My own laughter echoing through the halls of a life finally lived for me. The rest, I gave it to the world. And somehow, in giving it away, I got more back than I ever imagined. So if you're sitting in silence, waiting for someone to love you the way you deserve, hear me when I say this. You don't have to wait anymore. You are allowed to choose you. And that's not selfish. That's freedom. And that, my dear listeners, was the story of heartbreak, awakening, and ultimately, freedom. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt forgotten by the very people you once gave everything to? Have you ever had to choose yourself after years of being overlooked? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Whether it's one sentence or a full story, your voice matters here. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice about what real love looks like, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more deeply human stories, just like this one. Because every time you share your truth, someone out there feels a little less alone. Until next time, stay strong, stay soft, and never forget your worth.